After Daniel Andrews claimed the Victorian hotel quarantine system was the gold standard, the highest in the country, vision has emerged of a quarantine worker at the Intercontinental Hotel on Collins Street on the job without a mask. For more on this and the developing situation in Victoria, I'm joined from Sydney by security expert and CEO of Calamity Security, Daniel Lewkovitz. Daniel, great to have you on the show. You're an expert in containment of big properties like hotels. We've talked to you previously last year when Victoria was in so much strife. How can Daniel Andrews possibly claim he's got a system that's the best in the country?
Well, unfortunately, Peter, the so-called gold standard has been demoted to the brown standard. And greetings to everybody who's going to be spending the next 5 days on the couch in Melbourne because of yet another stuff-up. Now, the amazing thing is, if you read the Bible, it says the pride always comes before the fall. And that's what's happened here. Now, in New South Wales, the Premier, the government here would have every right to be crowing about how effective hotel quarantine has been here and how effective our overall management of the pandemic has been. But they don't do that for much the same reason that Qantas would never boast about their safety record, even though they're entitled to do so, because you're only ever as good as your next screw-up. And when we look at what's happening in Victoria, it's not a case of the next screw-up, it's yet another screw-up. And here we are again over things that anybody could have seen coming. And we have management by the same people making the same mistakes and then standing up and doing everything except apologising and saying, we have no idea what we're doing.
Has it got to the point, for the sake of Victorians and for businesses and the economy of this state, that he puts his hands up and says, well, I'd love him to say puts his hands up and resign, but he puts his hands up and says, you know what, we can't do this. New South Wales, you can do this. We'll pay you per head for every returning Victorian that you take because we've tried and failed. We're into our third statewide stage 4 lockdown for Melburnians. Continuing lockdowns, economic devastation, particularly for the hospitality industry tonight. Does he just say they can't do it and outsource it to a state that can?
Well, New South Wales is already doing that, and New South Wales is carrying the load for most of the country and not getting paid for doing it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of political arrogance there because, as you say, they should have come to Sydney or New South Wales and said, well, can we just copy your playbook? But, for example, in New South Wales, the hotel quarantine scheme is run almost predominantly by private security. Now, Victoria, of course, on the basis of their stuff-up, would have felt, well, there's no way we're doing that. So instead they put in a system that they were never going to be able to resource. There's not enough police in Victoria to do policing as well as do hotel quarantine, but they don't want to sort of be accused of repeating the same stuff-up. And so instead we get this constant political spin, and I've not seen, this level of denial in the face of an actual crisis since the Iraqi information minister who stood there saying everything is fine while America was flattening Baghdad behind him. It's absolutely delusional, and I don't think Victorians are that stupid, even though there are still some people who think they're being saved by this. But I think part of the problem we have here is that, I'm an expert in risk management, and one of the things I know is that you cannot eliminate risk. You just can't. Smallpox is still around. Tuberculosis is still around. So this virus is going to be around. And if we look at, say, New South Wales, we don't panic and wet the bed every time a few people get infected. Even tonight, when other states are slamming the border, when Victorians are all in home detention, New South Wales hasn't closed the border. We just carry on and we go through it. And that's what needs to happen. We went from flattening the curve a year ago, what seems like a lifetime ago, to this idea of getting down to zero. And I don't think that's going to happen. And unless we start looking at risk properly, mistakes are going to happen in any scheme. If we look at New South Wales, which, I'm sorry, Premier Andrews, is the gold standard, the platinum standard even, there have been mistakes here. There were security companies here that have absolutely done the wrong thing and, potentially could have resulted in us going the same path as Victoria. And, it's regrettable that they're probably only going to get a slap on the wrist instead of the sort of penalties that are coming. But be that as it may, we know that things happen, mistakes happen, and so you build in a system that has the resilience to survive that and to allow you to continue operating. Because the reality is there are an awful lot of jobs where you can't do it working from home. So all the people who are sitting at home tweeting, you know, thank you, Premier, for protecting us, or are saying, well, we don't want to end up like London or America. What they should be doing is saying, well, we'd like to be like Sydney, because I've got to tell you, tomorrow, Valentine's Day, there's going to be a lot of people in Sydney out having lovely dinners, while there's people in Victoria who've done nothing wrong, who are now essentially prisoners in their own home because of incompetence. And Premier Andrews says that, well, we're following the advice, Well, I have some advice. Premier Andrews, you need to resign. Follow that advice.
All right, Daniel, as I said, doesn't mince his words. Daniel Lewkovitz, as always, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.